Welcome to Walk Talk, the Faith in Motion podcast, where two regular guys talk about their walk with Christ. We're not pastors, we're not priests, just passionate followers of Jesus, here to give an account for the hope that lies within us. We don't shy away from the tough topics or challenging scriptures. We just share our faith, and we hope that you find it helpful. We're your hosts, Randy Dupree and PJ Verdon. Thank you for joining us today. Just get the conversation about the hats and the shirts in this time, because people probably want to hear us give each other crap about what we're wearing. So what's up with this LA stuff, brother?
I guess so. Anybody that knows me knows that anytime they see me wearing LA stuff, I wear it for the real LA, which is Louisiana, not Los Angeles. But I think it was last year or something like that. They had the fires going on, whatever, and they were doing like a fundraiser, which was like a pray for LA, and so the little praying hands in the middle of LA instead of the
That's
the
cool.
regular gap. So I just thought it was cool because, I like to pray for Louisiana also because, I mean, everywhere needs prayer, but, I live in Louisiana. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know. And we didn't talk about this on air last time, but last time you were wearing a hat with the P and you were trying to convince me beforehand it didn't stand for PJ. And I was like, yeah,
Hey,
I don't know about all that.
man, that was a Puma hat. Their brand just happened to start with a P. It was a total coincidence.
Hey, well, I know our last episode we were getting a little, passionate would be the word I would use, to the point to where, my wife listened to that episode and she thought we were done. She said, "Hey, are you guys done? No more podcasts?" And I said, "What are you talking about? We got many more discussions to have, and probably a lot of them
Absolutely.
are going to be passionate too. So we are by no means done."
Absolutely, man. Man, that sometimes I think it's too wide of a misconception to think that, you know, Jesus himself was like Mr. Rogers, you know what I mean, with long hair and a robe. Like that's
Yeah.
not the Jesus that I serve, you know what I mean? And I'm not just talking about the table flipping Jesus, you know what I mean? But I'm talking about the Jesus who was very passionate about, the word, who would sit there and argue with the Pharisees and Sadducees, you know what I mean?
100%. And I'm gonna share a little behind the scenes for anyone who's listening. But we've been doing the Wild at Heart, Bible study mastermind group, virtually with a group of men. And what one of the things that we've been talking about is how God has put in us a heart for adventure, right?
Man,
And you can't tell me he put that heart into men without having that heart himself, right? And
100%.
and that's that masculine heart that you're talking about. That's not just flipping tables, but having, passionate debates and like looking for, adventure in life. So, we got that from
Absolutely.
him.
Absolutely. And you look at David was a perfect example, right? They say David was a man after God's own heart. And what did he do whenever Saul told him to go, what he told him to go kill all these Philistines? He was like, I'm gonna kill twice as many. You know what I'm saying? Like it
Right.
was
Right.
he was
Saul killed his thousands and
like
and David killed his tens of
10,000.
thousands.
Yeah, like
That's it.
they weren't no slouches. You know what I mean? Like, man, I'm gonna tell you one of my favorite people in the Bible, obviously aside from Jesus, was Joshua in the Old Testament, man, because like he followed up Moses, which is a hard thing to do,
Hmm.
and like man, he stood on business. He was not no slouch either, but
He
but
was a
my
general.
yeah, 100%. But one of my favorite things about Joshua that I feel like gets overlooked is, and I think it's at the end of the book of Joshua, is whenever it says basically, whenever Joshua stood up there and Israel was trying to decide, oh, well, what are we gonna do? Which way are we gonna go? He was like, man, y'all are gonna make a decisions what y'all gonna do. You know what I
Right.
mean? Period.
Right.
There's none of this back and forth. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And and
100%. 100%.
and whenever they saw him standing on business like that, they're like, you know what, us too. And so at the end of that book, it says that Israel served the Lord collectively, all of them, until
Right.
after the elders who had heard the word of Joshua died. So I'm
Mm,
like, man, like that's a pretty big thing to accomplish. You know what I mean? Being that
100%.
that strong of a man of God that it resonated with like there's not very many times that Israel was like, man, you know what? Let's get our crap together and let's all serve God. But Joshua accomplished that. So I
Yeah.
love Joshua.
Amen.
I think he's kind of underrated and overlooked a little bit. But yeah, shout out Joshua.
You know which one, you know who I really resonate with? I resonate with Joseph.
Yeah,
You know,
Joseph.
I mean, I just feel like he was just mistreated by his family, you know, by his brothers. Like he knew that like God had something in store for him, but he had a big mouth and he
Right.
just ran that mouth too much. You know, he told everybody, you know, how blessed he was going to be and told everyone about his
Yeah.
dreams and you know, they wanted to kill the guy and you know, he ended up going through hell before, you know, God eventually was able to, you know, use him and then God used him mightily. I mean, when you think about the patriarchs, it's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph,
Yeah.
right? And he wasn't the oldest of the 12, you know, brothers. He wasn't the one whose lineage, you know, Jesus came out of, but he's listed in, you know, as one of the patriarchs because of what God
100%.
did with him and how he saved them in Egypt.
And man, his story is so good because, you just see him. I mean, aside from Job, I guess, you just see him getting beat down at every turn, but him just staying positive and staying, on the right track and just, like, man, I'm not gonna let my circumstances determine, you know,
Yeah.
my reaction. I love that. Yeah, that's good stuff.
And he's
Good
a good
stuff.
example too of like someone who's doing the right thing for the right reasons. You
Yeah.
know, he was doing it because the Lord commanded. He's just like, you know, God said I shouldn't, you know, do this to my master. He basically was, you know, everywhere he went, he was just the best, you know, the best person, the best man, the best representative of, you know, someone who follows God that he could be, even when no one around even knew what that meant, or even when there was no one to, you know,
Right.
um,
He
to,
he
to
could have
tell
he
on
could have
him
been
or
messing up and then nobody would even
no
know.
one would have
Like,
known.
yeah,
Yeah, no one would have known. I mean,
you
when he
know?
was in the prison cell, like the, you know, in a foreign land sitting in prison, he's like, you know what? I'm gonna do my best job, the best I can to help out these guards, man. They got a tough job. And like, you know, it's gonna be good for them. It's gonna be good for the other inmates in here. Like if I just kind of help smooth things over. And he did it, you
Yeah.
know, and he was recognized for that. And he kept moving up because of the man he was and the integrity that he had. And I think, you know, I think that's something, you know, for us to, you know, to think about it, you know, especially because, you know, last time we were talking about like, you know, resting versus like working and like doing things for the right reasons. And like, I think Joseph's a good example of that, of like someone who was doing things for the right reasons. And whereas there might have been other people who were, let's just say, trying to climb the ladder in Egyptian society who,
Right.
you know, might have been doing things a little differently, right? And for the wrong reasons. And, you know, obviously some of those people existed at, you know, in Joseph's time and, you know, they weren't blessed by the Lord like he was.
Right, right. Yeah,
So,
man. Good stuff. Good
yeah,
stuff.
no, good stuff and good conversations, man. And so, you know, I did kind of want to circle back a little bit to the Sermon on the Mount because I know we've talked about that a few times. And you know, one thing that we didn't really get to a chance to touch on, and I think we're going to probably disagree slightly on this, but I don't really hear too many people talk about the fact that, you know, Jesus, at least from my perspective, he was the last Old Testament prophet. I say that because he was a prophet, but he was more than a prophet. He was the
Yeah,
prophet,
absolutely.
he was a priest, he was a king, he's my savior, right? But he was a prophet. You can't take that title away from him. And since he outlasted John the Baptist, who, you know, was beheaded while he was still alive, in my perspective, you know, Jesus is the last Old Covenant prophet because the Old Covenant ended with him and the new covenant began with him. And the only reason why I even think it's worth even pointing that out, because I think a lot of the confusion that at least I know that I've had, and I think you've had as well in the past, has been because a lot of the preaching and teachings that we've heard over the years fails to distinguish that.
Yeah, and it's wild. The first time I heard you say this, I was like, man, I didn't necessarily like it. Not saying it just it. I guess there's the stigma, obviously, because other religions think he was only a prophet. Maybe that it's
Mhm.
like you hear Jesus and prophet in the same sentence, and you just feel like, ugh, I don't know about that.
Right.
But
That's fair.
but yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, and I mean,
Yeah.
yes, that you know he was prophetic, you know what I mean? He was so, and but yeah, I get it, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, he was prophetic in that, you know, he did, you know, what all the other prophets did, right? He basically came and he, you know, spoke for God, you know, to the people. He came with a message from God.
Well, and I think it's important to note that you know Jesus was the greater of a ton of people, that
Right.
preceded him, right? You know what I
Right.
mean? So yeah, so
Yeah,
makes sense. You know what I
it's
mean?
hard to give him a title that other people have had because of the fact that he is so far above
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
beyond,
yeah,
you
right,
know.
yeah.
But it wouldn't be the first time. I mean, mm, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there other times where the title Son of Man is used? Isn't Job called Son of Man maybe? Or
Mm.
Adam? I feel like someone else is called Son of Man besides just Jesus. Let me Google it.
Yeah, you're gonna have to look that up, man. And I'm gonna tell you why I'm unclear, because man, you hear so much crap. I'm sorry, it just is what it is. You hear so much crap on the internet, and
Yeah.
people like throwing stuff out, and I've heard correlations about them being like, oh, Satan was called the Son of Man, and it's like they come up with all this just disgusting doctrine that's like so far off and convoluted and just like making up stories. It's just, anyways. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm like, I don't really remember if that's something that I legit heard or heard in a
Well,
context like that.
according to AI here, it says that God calls Ezekiel son of man over 90 times, just stressing his humanity in contrast to God's holiness. And it says in Daniel 7:13,
Mm,
it says, "Speak of one like a son of man, a prophetic exalted figure." And then it also says that Ezekiel was a human prophet, just like Jesus was a prophet, and Daniel was a messianic figure, even though he wasn't the Messiah, and that eventually Jesus fulfilled Daniel's vision. So,
yeah.
like, okay, I don't know why I was thinking that Adam had been called a son of man or anyone else, but I guess I wasn't completely off. Someone was called Son of Man besides Jesus, but
Yeah.
it is tough though
Yeah.
to hear any other term that's typically just referred, we typically reserve for Jesus when we hear it, used in another context. It is kind of off. But I mean, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, do you think that checks that he was the last old covenant prophet? And if you do, what do you think that means? If you don't, then tell me why.
I mean, yeah, I guess I would agree because, after his death, I mean, old covenant was was completed. It was fulfilled.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It does. I've never looked at it or thought about it from that perspective. And I guess like maybe even the reason why the in reference to Jesus, it's like the word prophet, I guess, never necessarily came to mind, even though I know that he did prophesy. But it's
Hmm.
like it's like I don't necessarily think that he was like you know uh telling telling the future, like he just knew the future. Like, I don't know. It doesn't want to. I mean, we're talking about God, God in the flesh, so it's not like like I don't know. It's just so a weird. I never thought about it from that perspective. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
different.
I know. It's a different perspective, but let me ask you this then. So, we've talked on a few episodes now, about the Sermon on the Mount, and I do eventually want to move on completely to other topics. But what do you think that means? I mean, that Jesus' most, you know, popular, his like the pinnacle of his message was given by an old covenant prophet. What do you think that means? Does it mean anything to you? I mean, and I'm not saying that like in a facetious way. Like, I mean, it means something to me is why I'm asking. And it's kind of the basis of why, I've said in a lot of cases, like, we have to like discern between when he's like talking to a bunch of unsaved Jews who are trying to follow the law versus like things that are applicable to 2026, people in 2026.
Yeah, man. I guess you know from the basis of never having really thought about it in that perspective. I mean, just off the top of my head, I mean, I'm not sure what that means. Like, I'd have to, kind of, I'd kind of have to sit with it and think about it, pray about it for a
Okay.
little bit. Maybe, I mean, nothing just, it doesn't just like, oh, it doesn't hit me like that. So let me know. Tell me
Let me
about
get
it.
my Bible out here because there's some things in here that I remember kind of touched on a little bit when we read through it a couple episodes ago. Let's see here. So he gives us a good, we talked about the Beatitudes already, right? He gives us like a good kind of mindset that we should be in. He talks about salt and light. He talks about, fulfilling the law. He didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law, which
Right.
again, I think that just like alludes to the fact that he is an old covenant prophet, talking from this perspective, because the law hadn't been fulfilled. He hadn't been sacrificed, all that kind of stuff. Then he sets the bar super high, talking about murder in your heart, adultery in your heart. We've already talked about that. He's really just kind of like saying, hey, like, the bar is far higher than you think. Anyone who thinks that they're actually, you know, keeping the law, you're not. He just moving that bar so high that no one can reach it. Let's see. He talks about forbidding oaths. Let's see here. Going the second mile, loving your enemies. Let's talk about loving your enemies, because he says here in verse 43 of chapter 5, Matthew 5:43, you have heard it that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore, and then he sums it up, therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, I'll be
Right.
honest here. And I want to hear what you think, but I'll be honest, up until that last verse 48, I was like, this all checks. Like, this sounds like stuff that I think, like, as Christians, we should probably, like, try to adhere to. Then at the very end, he's like, so now go and be perfect. And I'm like, this is him setting the bar super high again. But what do you think?
Right.
This podcast is sponsored by my company, ForgePoint. Do you want to make 2026 a year of growth but don't know where to start? Join a 5-week mastermind class focused on the 15 invaluable laws of growth by John Maxwell. You'll unlock your full potential as you become more intentional about growth that will impact your life, your family, and your community. We have a special group for pastors and church leaders starting soon. Just go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off. Again, go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off.
But what do you think?
Right. And look, again, I'll go off of this commentary in this Bible from scholars, people who have done more research than I have to this point. And so it says in regards to chapter 5, verse 48, it says, this section of the Sermon on the Mount is summarized with the statement, therefore you shall be perfect. Since the New Testament is clear that even the believer is capable of sin, the term perfect in Greek teleos is not to be understood as sinless perfection. Perfect here means complete. The sense is that God's work in an individual's life is proven to be successful when one freely loves those who love him as well as those who are his enemies. So that's the perspective that it's giving here. So I guess that the way perfect in Greek is put there, it doesn't mean sinless perfection, but more of complete. So in context, I guess it says, therefore you shall be complete, just as your Father is.
I don't know. That's interesting. I mean, my first gut instinct here in that commentary, which I'm thankful for that, commentary. So thanks for pulling that out. My first instinct is I'm tempted to say, can both be true? Can it be true that Jesus is saying, like, be perfect, and he's setting the bar super high again to show people, just how fall they short, but also saying,
How
like,
short they fall. I like you said, how
what
fall they short.
how fall they short? Yeah,
Yeah.
show people just how fall they short, because autumn is
Well,
just not the best season.
right.
No,
So,
no, but go
well,
ahead.
and to your point here, I mean, I guess the way I've always taken it myself, before reading this commentary, was that we know that Jesus is perfect, and so I
Yeah.
guess reading this, I'm thinking about it from this side of the
It's hard
the
not to, right?
right, yeah. So
I mean, yeah, because if I read it from this side of the new covenant and this
right,
side of the resurrection, I'm
right,
thinking he's setting the bar super high and he's saying be perfect. And the only way that that can ever happen is if He's
He
in
lives
you
in
and
us.
you're in
Yeah,
him.
100%. Yeah.
And
That yeah.
and and so that's why I said my gut tells me like can both be true? Because can that be true, but also it be true that like there is something there to being complete and your faith, like we were talking previously, like being more evident through you, demonstrating these attributes.
Well,
I don't know.
and look, man, what's cool is I had a guy that I'm pretty close with, um, send me a video on this exact verse earlier today, and he was like, "Man, what are your thoughts here?" Because the
Mm.
guy is referencing this video, and he's like, we have this circumcised Christianity, again, kind of going back to the
Ooh, I like
the
that term, circumcised Christianity.
yeah, so
I
where
never
it's
heard
like
that before.
it's like, man, these people who believe in the Bible are just soft, like they are like, again, going back to the idea of Jesus being Mr.
Mm,
Rogers and not having a warrior mentality, and us not having that same heart in us, and it's like he's saying to love your enemies, but what enemies is he talking about? Is he talking about people who are like coming into your safe space and trying to do you harm? And I don't think
right.
that that's what he's talking about at all. You know what I mean? I think given the evidence of Old Testament that, there's times where God commanded people in the Bible to go and slay people. You know what I mean?
Right,
Wipe out
right.
whole, so and I think that it's the idea of whenever we're talking about enemies, right? And I guess I could look into this commentary here, I guess maybe for some clarity, but I don't think that it's necessarily the idea of like some of the stuff that we have going on in our country today, right? So I don't think
Mm.
that if we, let's just say we were to be invaded, I don't think that as Christian men, we're to sit here idly by and just say, "Hey, look, man, why do y'all want to fight us? We love you. We love you as our enemies." Just I think that we have to take up arms and defend. I know that I would feel like I need to defend my family.
I
Period.
and I agree with that, but let me just play devil's advocate just for a second because it wouldn't be a fun show if we didn't have some element of argument and debate here. But do you know what actually ended the um Christians being slaughtered in the Colosseum?
Yeah, the people got tired of seeing it.
Do you know why?
They started to feel bad for him.
Yeah, because of the way the Christians like accepted it and they thought it was such an honor to die for their savior. And it was no longer like this contest where like they could get any thrills out of it. They saw it now as just like basically what it was, which was just like this total just waste of human life. And it wasn't it wasn't the slaves and the Christians rising up and overthrowing that caused it to end. It was literally them submitting to that torment into that death that caused the change, which the reason why I bring that up is because, like I said, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm also playing devil's advocate here. Um, how far do we take that example? You know what I mean? How far do we take it? Do we take it just when we turn the other cheek? If someone, you know, hits us in the face and we give them the other side, or do we take it all the way to our deaths and even the deaths of our family?
Man, and look again. So this is there's a lot here. Like I don't know because I don't know if it has that duality purpose, right? Because at the time, whenever Jesus is saying these things, right, you know, Jews are living under Roman rule, so I
Hmm.
think that that's you have natural enemies there, right?
Sure, sure.
And I think part of what he's saying is like, man, you know, I didn't come here just to save y'all. I came here to save everybody. Right? Like,
100%.
you know what I
Right.
mean? And so I think that it was just kind of getting them to maybe shift their perspective a little bit and because they're expecting Jesus to show up, wipe out the Romans, Jews back on top like in the time of David. So maybe there's some of that and maybe, I think about,
Let me just
loving.
pause you right there real quick, real
Go ahead.
quick.
Go ahead.
First of all, I think that's a great explanation, and then what you said about, like, Jesus didn't just come to save a small group, he came to save everybody.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's very wise. I think that's very and very well put. So good on you there, brother. But one thing I would say is, we talked previously and we have a little bit difference of agreement on like the Great Commission.
Mhm.
So I'm where I'm going is like, if you would say that that was okay for that time, but maybe not for this time to lay down our lives and our families' lives, I kind of see that as the same kind of context of the Great Commission, that maybe it was a little bit more applicable back then than it is now. But I'll just stop there. Go ahead.
No, no, that's a good point. I can see that. I can see that. We can come back to that. I was just
And by
gonna
the way,
go.
I'm not against witnessing or missions or anything like that. I just think that it's one of those things that you have to do for the right reasons and be called to do. But
So, so this commentary here is for chapter 5, verses 43 and 44. So it says Jesus's command to love your enemies summarizes the entire second table of the law. See Leviticus 19:18 through 34. Conversely, the words hate your enemy, though a popular concept in Jesus' day, are not explicitly taught in Scripture. The love enjoined in this passage is love that originates from God Himself. Man is not commanded to attempt to love his enemy on the basis of mere human affection, but rather on the basis of a love that comes from God. The quality of love commanded here is expressed by giving. Bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who persecute you. Loving an enemy involves actively seeking that person's good and praying for him or her. So see, even in that context, right?
yeah, yeah.
It's not even necessarily the action of you know what I mean? Like
Well,
it's not necessarily saying, hey, look, if you are coming at me, I don't know, man.
you know what you just made me think of too, and it kind of again it goes back to some of our previous conversations, but something in that commentary just made me think that some of these commandments that Jesus gives in the Sermon on the Mount, I think I think not only were they impossible and were they setting the bar super high, but I think that if there is any possibility of them being accomplished, it could only be accomplished
Through
by
God.
Christians with the
Oh,
Spirit of God living
yeah,
inside of them
yeah,
today. Because, like you were
yeah.
talking about, like the concept, I mean, when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, right? That whole concept just seemed like so crazy to these people. And loving your enemies seems so crazy to them because those are supernatural things that can only happen with the Spirit of God. So if we're going to even, not that again, not that we should be striving to do anything like this or be striving to meet a commandment or be perfect, but if we're ever going to even get close to it, I think the only way is through God living and working in us, because it's just so contrary to human nature.
Right, 100%. And see, so I guess what I was starting to say is like this. So looking at it from, bless those who curse you, do good for those who hate you, and pray for those who persecute you. Man, it's like all of those things I feel like you can do for anybody. Like, I mean, I guess we may have people in our lives that we don't necessarily get along. I don't know that
Right.
we necessarily consider each other enemies or anything like
Call them
that.
enemies. Yeah.
Right, but you could have these affections because of the love of God and you for these people, right? But at the same time, man, I feel like you can be doing that, but man, for whatever reason, I feel like if it went past that and it was basically this person coming at you to take your life,
Yeah.
I think that it's not just like a lay down and die situation. I think that we at that point,
It's
you
so tough, man, because I'll be honest with you, like, you know, I got 3 kids. I would die for them, and I would make someone else die for them if I had to protect them, even though
100%.
I would never want death, on anyone. If it came down to their life or my kid's life, yeah, like, I mean, what
And I
father
and I f
wouldn't?
I
But
feel
at
like
this
yeah, isn't that our job as the head of our household?
I feel like it is, but at the same
I
time,
agree.
I also have to look at that person as someone that Jesus died for and that Jesus loves, and I have to think like, is there another way? What is the right thing to do? And at the end of the day, like if I'm thinking like, in the grand scheme of things, like just picturing like in the eyes of eternity, right? Like, is a few more years off of our life worth it if this person eventually gets saved from that encounter?
And I don't know. And
I
look,
don't know. I
I don't know
mean,
why. I know
I don't
this
think
is a
I'd ever find out because I
right,
know what I would
right,
do.
right. And I think that this is kind of a good thing to point out, even though it's definitely, you know, old covenant law based. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's widely and more commonly misquoted that the commandment is thou shalt not kill, but is it thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not commit murder?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the version of the Bible, and the way that that word is interpreted. I don't know what the
Well,
original word is, but I mean, to me, it makes more sense that we're talking murder
right,
than just kill.
because God Himself is like, hey, go kill all them
Go
people.
kill,
So
yeah.
yeah, because that's the land that I promised you. You know what I
And
mean?
it's hard to make the argument that self-defense would be murder, right?
Right, right.
It's more likely that you're killing, but it's not murder.
Correct, correct. You're not doing it for sport. You're doing it out
Right.
of necessity,
But the
basically.
argument is still there when we're talking about someone's salvation and like what's better? Is it better to kill even though it's not murder,
Well,
or is it better to, lay down your life if there's a chance that person might be saved from it?
and I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, if you're in if you're in a place where you can defend your own life without taking a life, you don't just take it for
Absolutely.
sport.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Then yeah, that's definitely the better option. Yeah.
100%. So
Yeah.
I mean,
Or if,
it
like one of our former presidents said, if you could just shoot him in the leg, with the shotgun, then
well,
without getting political, I mean, we
uh,
did have a president that suggested we just shoot him in the leg.
wow.
So,
But yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. I think it's just one of those tough situations. I mean, it brings up like a question of something like, you know, Judas Iscariot, right? He betrayed Jesus and then he went and hung himself. Like,
right.
what
Right.
if he wouldn't have hung himself? Do I believe that he could have been saved? Absolutely. I believe that if he would have repented and you know what I mean, I think that he could have achieved salvation. Unfortunately,
Right.
he took his life before that point. But it's just one of those things. It's like, yeah, who knows who knows what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. Like, man, the cool thing is we had a men's ministry night one night, and real awesome man of God, man. This guy's got a powerful testimony and stuff like that. Matter of fact, it's kind of funny. I've known him since I was little, man. I'm talking about like elementary school years. Him and I have just known each other, and you could tell he knows me from way back because he calls me Peter. He's like, "What's up, brother Peter?" And back before I could have my own nickname, everybody called you your government name, so I was Peter. So it depends on if somebody calls me Peter, I know what stage of my life they know me from. But anyways, he was talking about how he was ministering to this guy, approached him and was trying to, just get some encouragement, some words and stuff like that going through a situation. And so he's witnessing to him and stuff like that. And the guy's like, man, I just don't know. Like, I just don't feel like right now is the right time, for this. Like, I don't feel like this is where I'm at. I don't feel like I'm ready to commit. He's like, he's like, I'll just do it later. And he was like, this guy's talking like he got time. And he's like, who told you that? And I was just like, man, it was funny, but it was profound. Like, for real, like who tells us, who gives us this idea that we can just I mean, I'm gonna get to that later. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's like it's
He
and
probably
especially
he probably only believes his past sins are gonna be forgiven. You don't wanna get saved too soon, man. He's
well,
got stuff he wants to do.
I don't think it's that, man. It's just like,
I'm
you know,
kidding.
I know, but it's like, you hear people who talk about stuff like, man, I wanna get this cleaned up and that cleaned up before. And it's like, man, Jesus will meet you where you at. You know what I mean? Like that, you don't have to wait. Just come to him. He'll wash you. You know what I'm saying? You ain't got to worry about trying to clean up your own house. Like he'll do
Right.
the work. But it is crazy, and especially I guess and maybe why it stuck out and resonated with me so much was because you know I mean if you're if you've ever read or even heard of Revelation, then you pick your head up and you look around and you're like, whoa, you know what I mean? We're living in a crazy time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%, man. And and back to, dying or killing or whatever, to defend your family. Like I'm definitely, a man who believes and is, it has a conviction of my faith to the point of death. And I would die for my faith just like I would die for my family. But that
Absolutely.
doesn't mean I'm just gonna like lay down. I mean, you're gonna have to kill me. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm gonna fight till the end, whether it's defending my family or even my own life. Like I'm not just gonna lay it down. I mean, I'm gonna try to my best to live and and survive and not let anyone take it from me. But if at the end of the day, like, my life is taken because of my faith or because I'm defending my family or whatever, then, you know, so be it.
absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but
No, that was good. That was good, and that's a very interesting story. And you're right. Like when you just look around, it's like, man, I mean, we talked about last time how like this, it really is the most safest time to live. But there's so much more than just safety. There's like evil in
100%.
this world that exists in a way that maybe it never has existed before.
Yeah,
Even if we have more laws and more rules, and there is you know overall like a safer world, that doesn't mean we have any less of an evil world. The world is still as evil as it always was, if not
absolutely.
more so. And I do believe we are closer to Jesus coming back every day than,
Absolutely.
ever before. So,
Yeah. Yeah, man.
yeah,
Mm. Dang, I just I lost my train of thought. There was something that you had said that that brought
the
something
evil
up.
in the world or like
I think, and I don't remember. It's all good. It's all good.
okay.
If it comes back to me, then I'll spit it out, man.
Let me
But yeah,
go back
man.
to sorry, go ahead.
No, no, you go. You're good. Go ahead.
I was just gonna go back to the Sermon on the Mount because I do think there was a couple other things. So the last thing we talked about was loving your neighbors, which kind of got us off on the tangent of like talking about like protecting your family and whatnot. And then it says like do not judge in Matthew 7. Do not judge that you be not judged, for the judgment you judge you will be judged, and the measure you use it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and do not consider the
Hmm.
plank in your own eye? I mean, I
I,
think that's all just like good practical advice that applies no matter,
I
no
think
matter the context.
I think we need to kind of hover over this because I think that this is a pretty big misconception. You know, and not to say that there's not reason for it or merit to it, but whenever you're a Christian, you hear like, "Oh, you're not supposed to judge. Only God can judge," right? You know what I mean? Like that gets thrown out a lot. I mean, if we're being honest, you know what I
Sure.
mean?
Yeah.
And they they think that Christians are so judgmental. Which again, like I said, I'm not saying that there's no validity to some of these claims, but anyways, so it's just funny. So I just wanted to read this commentary that says, "Judge not refers to an unfavorable and condemnatory judgment that is inconsistent with those who love their enemies. This does not mean that a Christian should never exercise judgment of any kind under any circumstances. In fact, Jesus' subsequent teaching demands that we exercise discernment. In light of immediate context, Jesus is prohibiting not the exercise of spiritual discernment, but the act of condemning others as in the manner that is reserved for God alone. Jesus' teaching is thus consistent with Paul's instruction in Romans 12:19, verse 19 through 21, and Jesus' earlier instruction that we should love our enemies, and that
Right.
you be not judged refers to ultimate judgment of God.
I,
So, you know what I mean?
yeah, and I would say I generally would agree with that too, because I think that when I hear "do not judge," like we all have to make judgments every day just to survive. I mean, what we were
100%, yeah.
talking about earlier about are you going to defend your family if it came down to it? That's a judgment that you got to make based on what
Judgment call,
other
yeah.
people might be doing. However, what I do like is if you keep talking, or keep talking, if you keep reading and yeah, keep on talking. If you keep reading in verse 4, it says, how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, there's a plank in your own? Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck. To me, I'll tell you what my takeaway is from this whole section. Like when I read everything up into, the end of verse 5, right? Where he talks about removing the speck.
Mhm.
What I hear is like, look, man, you struggle with the sin, you're an alcoholic, right? You come to my church, you want to be my brother, you want to tell me you're a Christian? Who am I to judge you and say, no, you're not? kick you out of my congregation because of your sin when I sin myself every day. Like, that's not the judgment I'm here to pass. However, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I haven't had a drink in years, and you're a struggling alcoholic. I've removed that speck. Can I now come beside you as a brother and say, hey, man, this is not what God wants for you? Like, let's work on this together? Like, absolutely. Like,
Yeah, I believe
absolutely.
I
Right?
believe that
That's
that's the
kind of
kind
how
of
I take it.
I believe that that's the kind of encouragement and fellowship that we're supposed to have, honestly. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's that's not pointing out the speck in somebody's eye at that point. That's saying, "Let me help you remove, your own speck because I've been there." So, and I think that
Well,
there's
you're
there's
pointing it out to help them remove it,
Right, yeah,
but you're
but,
starting with you've overcome it first. I think so. I guess what I'm saying,
100%.
if I had to sum it up, I would say that like we're not to go around and just like point out people's sins and like try to like judge them based on it. What we are called to do though is when God has like given us challenges in our life or allowed us. I shouldn't even say because words matter. I shouldn't say God has given. When God has allowed us to go through challenges and we've overcome those through His grace, and then those are in the rearview mirror. I do think that like we should try to come alongside our brothers and like help them then to remove their own and
Well,
not try to do it in a pushy way or a forceful way. If I come to you and you tell me kick rocks, I'm good right now. All right, but just know that I've been there and through the grace of God I've overcome it and I'm here for you. You know what I'm
well,
saying?
a and another, what I think is an important perspective to remember though is in this context, in your example, you're talking about if I'm a recovering alcoholic and you are, struggling with it. But I think what's important to remember
Oh no,
also
you were the one struggling. I
E
was I
either
was I recovered.
either way, but,
Don't try
like,
to put that on me.
I think what's important to remember, man, is, let's say that you're the, one struggling with alcohol and let's say I'm struggling with, pornography or overeating or whatever, it doesn't matter, and I'm like, "Man, look, you should really get rid of that. You should stop drinking, man." You know what I mean? Or let's just call it me overeating because, like most people would be like, "Oh, whatever." They don't see them the same. They look at
Right.
alcohol and they're like, "Oh, look, there's a bad thing." And so it's like you have a problem with drinking and I have a problem with overeating or whatever, and I'm just like, "Man, you need to stop drinking." I don't think that that's right. Not realizing that doesn't matter what sin you wanna what sin you wanna label, it doesn't matter, but the fact is that, I can't point out what I think that you should be doing in your own walk whenever I'm sure no matter what where I'm at in my walk, there's still things that I could work on as well, you know what I mean? Even though they
Right.
may or may not be as recognizable as something that somebody just notices and says, "That's so bad. You call yourself a Christian?" Because there's things that we do. I feel like uh, anything, anything that we prioritize above God is a problem. It doesn't matter what it. I don't care if it's sleep. I don't care if you say I will not go to church in the morning because I have to wake up too early and I just want to sleep in. If you're prioritizing sleep over God, I'm just saying, as an example, I'm just saying, because people tend to identify what they think are these bigger, more
Right.
evident things, so
100%. Yep. All right.
This podcast is sponsored by my company, ForgePoint. Do you want to make 2026 a year of growth but don't know where to start? Join a 5-week mastermind class focused on the 15 invaluable laws of growth by John Maxwell. You'll unlock your full potential as you become more intentional about growth that will impact your life, your family, and your community. We have a special group for pastors and church leaders starting soon. Just go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off. Again, go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off.
I do want to jump, unless you have any issue, to 7:15, where he talks about knowing them by their fruit. I'm skipping a little bit, but
it's okay. That's okay. I mean, we've spent some time here, and like you said, man, we could spend weeks here. You know what I mean?
right.
But
Oh yeah,
but
I mean, this is like a full dissertation. Like this could be, there's so much here, and we're just two regular guys. What do we know, right? We're
right,
just giving it
right.
to you the way that we think we know it. And when he talks about the fruit, right? So he says some things here that I've heard quoted, and I would say probably mostly misquoted so many times. So let me just read it again. So 7:15. Matthew 7:15. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. Okay, so let me just stop there for a second. Let me just, if I could just get your permission to go on a little bit of a rant here before you jump in.
Go
Um,
ahead.
First of all, you hear verse 17 so much, like people are talking to Christians. Every good tree bears good fruit, bad trees bear bad fruit. Okay, it totally ignores that the whole section started off by talking about false prophets. So what do I make of that? Nothing really. I'm just pointing that out. I don't really know what to make of that, but I do know that context matters. And it starts
Yeah.
off by talking about false prophets. So I have never heard this preached in order to tell Christians, hey guys, y'all need to watch out for false prophets. I've heard this preached like 99% of the time as, make sure you sin less, make sure you go do some stuff, because you're going to know a tree by its fruit. So I just wanted to point that out. However, my opinion, is that it is impossible for us to bear good fruit. By our nature, we could only bear bad fruit. And if we ever bear good fruit, it is only the Holy Spirit of God that's bearing that fruit through us. We just happen to be the person who it's showing up through. So that's my opinion on that whole matter. I'm sticking to it.
Man, I think you're gonna like this commentary then that I'm looking at. So
Hit me with the commentary. I'm not a commentary reader, man, but I love hearing it read. I will say that.
well, and look, man, I'm gonna be honest with you. This Bible here has this commentary has helped.
Don't tell
Help.
anyone the title until they're sponsoring us. I'm just kidding.
It's helped grow me. It really has. But so okay. So just to start back in 7:15, right? So
Yeah.
where we're talking about you'll know them by their fruits. So this says the warning, beware of false prophets, fits appropriately with the concept of the two ways. Since many are on the path leading to destruction, there is a sense in which they are led by the wrong people. False prophets were prevalent in the Old Testament, whereas God's true prophets were often in the minority. False prophets appear in sheep's clothing, but are in reality ravenous wolves. This is a fitting description of those preachers who have denied or distorted the truth of the gospel. Their description is similar to that of the great false prophet in Revelation 13:11. A true test of a prophet was the conformity of his doctrine to the scriptures. So here's the part that I think that you're going to like. Their fruits refer not only to the actions of their lives, but also to the doctrines they proclaim. The two trees are contrasted in relation to the fruit they produce. The normal and consistent production of fruit in a person's life, whether good or bad, will bear evidence to their relationship with God. Verse 19 illustrates the unfruitful life and the unregenerate who is thrown into the fire. But yeah, so that's kind of cool that this commentary is basically talking about their fruits being the doctrine in which they, you know what I mean? They proclaim.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go
No,
ahead.
that's it. Like it's so while we're thinking very much in a you plant a tree, fruit's going to grow. Is the tree good? Have good fruit to eat or not? And this mentions nothing really, in reference to that. This says it's referring to the doctrine that they proclaim, and whether
and I had never heard that before, so that's good. It's good stuff. I was going to say you got a little bit ahead of me because you talked about the verses 18, 19, and 20 where it says, I think I read 18, good tree can't bear bad and bad tree can't bear good, but then 19 says every tree that does not bear fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, you know them by the fruits. Again, I've always heard this preached, like telling Christians, like, guys, you better watch out. Either are you a good tree or you a bad tree? Because if you're a bad tree, you're going to be thrown in the fire. And here, we take the time that apparently a lot of people don't to read some commentary. And it's like, actually, it's talking about their doctrine.
Well, and that's what I love. I mean, so how crazy is it that this pops up whenever I feel like this is exactly what we're trying to do is make sure that the doctrine that we follow and share is accurate. And like I've mentioned before, I know that there's a lot of doctrine that have multiple sides to it, and both sides can be backed up with different scripture, which is, again, I would always I think it's important to know the different sides, right? To see the multiple perspectives, to read the supporting scriptures. Like I've said before, pray about it, work that out with you and God. But
Right.
in order to make sure that you're doctrinally sound on what you believe, and your convictions for that is rooted in the right place, so
Yep.
that whenever you're sharing it, you're not inherently, right, a false prophet or ravenous wolf in sheep's clothing.
100%, man. And I'm glad to hear that commentary, because like I said, I just feel like that's something that is so often just totally left out of the conversation whenever these verses ever come up. And again, this kind of just goes back to what I keep saying about context and just understanding, like, what side of the covenant are we on? What side of the crucifixion are we on? Who's the audience? All this stuff, because I don't have all the answers, but I know that all those things are important to finding the answers, right? And
Yeah.
if you just take a verse or even a short passage out of context and say, the Bible is
Oh,
God's love letter to you, every single word
oh,
applies, then like it's a very superficial faith. And I think it leads to just so much like misunderstanding and confusion. And that's when the gospel no longer is, my burden is light, I,
my
I'm
yoke
drawing a
is,
blank.
yeah, my yoke is easy, my burden is
My
light.
yoke is easy, my burden is light. That's when
Yeah,
it no longer feels that way. And so,
100%.
it's good commentary right there. And I
Well,
just want to just say for all the listeners out there, we spent a lot of time the first few episodes talking about the gospel, talking about, the Sermon on the Mount. We do have other things that we want to talk about that's on our list. And P, you kind of alluded to, other doctrines earlier, things like, the Holy Spirit and whether it convicts Christians, baptism, work, speaking in tongues, the gospel message we've talked about a lot, praying to saints, the Trinity, eternity. We have a whole list of topics that we're going
absolutely,
to
yeah.
be talking about in the future, so bear with us. I think this might be our last one for a while, where we talk about the Sermon on the Mount. We've kind of covered, the new covenant versus old covenant perspective, Jesus being an old covenant prophet. And so in the future, we're going to get into a lot of these different topics and our perspective on it.
Well, I think something good to point out is that we laid out a list of things that we were like, man, let's just brainstorm some ideas of things that we could talk about, right? And you just heard some of those, but our main priority, right, is to let this thing be spirit led. And so what'll happen sometimes is we'll start off like, hey, we're gonna talk about this, and then what you're seeing is what manifests itself through an organic conversation. You know
Real,
what I
real
mean?
quick, if anybody listened to the last episode and this one back to back, they're going to say, wait a second, I thought PJ was the guy with the list and Randy was the one talking about led with the Spirit. What just happened? Did these
Right.
guys switch hats today? What's
Well,
going on
no,
here?
but yeah, and so it's cool to go back to a point you made a little while ago, and this is something that we can get into about how misunderstanding doctrine can lead to a whole mess of things. Is we'll get to the point where the only point in our Bible where Lucifer is mentioned, right? And it's correlated with Hallel and the morning star, and that was a whole mess that had people
Superman?
literally. No, yeah. So well, that's something that
You say
we'll
it
have
was
to touch.
coordinated with Kal-El?
No, Hallel, which is Latin, I believe, for morning star.
Oh
And
man, you're gonna have to enlighten me on this one. But
oh man, it's so crazy because literally they started spinning doctrine where there's times where, so that based off of that one spot where they're basically saying that Lucifer is being referenced as the morning star instead of the king of Babylon, and Jesus is later called the morning star. They make the correlation that Jesus and Lucifer is the same person, and there are people who believe this crap, and they've gone so far down this rabbit hole, and it's just insane. So again, we'll maybe touch on that on a different thing, but it just
I'll
as
add
an
it to my
example.
list.
Yeah, it just as an example of how just a simple misunderstanding of something could just lead to just so much
So wait a second, you're
craziness.
saying that the movie Superman was
No,
based on Jesus, but Jesus was based on Satan, who was
no,
Hal-El, but Hal-El is Superman's real name? Oh my
no, but
gosh, there's a circle of confusion here.
there is literally like a bunch of stuff out there about
I'm
the
I'm
reason
kidding.
why, but no, like there's like a
We'll get
Superman
into it.
theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Kal-El, Hal-El, I'm serious. It's a whole thing, but
There's something there. Yeah.
there is. Well, I'm gonna save it for that time. But yeah, man, it's just to speak to. I use that. Sorry, I know it's a lot, but I use that as an example of exactly what you just said. Misunderstanding scripture, leading to a whole mess of things that are so far off basis. You know what I mean? So
Right. Right.
so yeah, that was the point of that. Sorry, we went
No, no, that's
sideways.
good. That's a good preview for next time. We should just drop it right there on a cliffhanger, and people got to listen to the next episode to hear us talk about Superman, how Superman tried to take away everyone's sins, but Jesus beat him to it. Or I'm kidding.
No. Yeah, man. So, but anyways, moving on back to going through this Sermon on the Mount.
So
But
yeah, so I think I pretty much touched on all the verses I wanted to, kind of get off my chest. Was there anything that I skipped over that maybe you wanted to circle back to, or are you good with? Because we're pretty much at the end. The last piece is building on the rock, and I never knew you, which we did talk about. I never knew you previously, so I'm good with moving past that one.
yeah, I guess I'll finish out with this final commentary right here. I don't know why it just stuck out to me. Um, hmm. So this is in reference to chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. It says, "Not everyone who makes a profession to follow Christ or identifies him or herself as a Christian is genuinely saved. Even the outward verbal acknowledgement of his lordship is, in itself, not enough to save the unbeliever apart from true repentance and faith. Those who have been redeemed and those who do the will of the Father. The present tense of the verb do emphasizes continuous obedience to the will of God as the normal course of their lives." And
Mm.
then, yeah, I don't know. So that just jumped out at me while we were talking. But
No, that's good because we didn't really touch on that too much when we were talking about that
right,
section on "I Never Knew You," which was Matthew 7:21 through 23. We talked about it a little bit about what it means to be known by God versus to know God, and I think in my opinion, the only way we're going to be known by God is if He's living inside of us, and if we are in constant communion with Him, and from my perspective, that means like our prayer life is very important.
yeah, man. I'm sorry. Can I just finish this little bit out? It's so good. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, man.
And look,
Go ahead.
just
You
for a
ain't gotta
point
be
of
sorry.
reference,
Yeah.
just for a point of reference for everybody listening, I do lean on this commentary, and just so you know, it's not the only thing though. Like I will check it against other different sources that I like to check on sometimes Bible Hub or like hermeneutics or just different things, or just in line with notes that I've taken from different things. So I try to check multiple. I know that this is supposed to be from multiple scholars and stuff like that, but anyways, just uh throwing that out there. So anyways, this is in reference to uh 7:24 through 27. It says, "On the basis of all that he has taught and illustrated throughout his sermon, Jesus proclaimed that all who both hear and obey his sayings will experience salvation. Merely hearing the message of Jesus will not change one's life. For salvation to be evident, one's life must be characterized by obedience to Jesus' instructions. The elements of the closing illustrations are drawn from the simplicity of nature itself: the rock, the rain, the winds. The man whose house collapsed was at fault, not because he failed to labor or because he was responsible for the winds, but because he did not lay the proper foundation. The shifting sand represents human opinion and the doctrines of men as opposed to these sayings." Um, the
So
words.
so so that oh, you're still going? Sorry.
No. That's good, man. Like I just thought that was
The one
that
thing
was
I hear that's missing from that, it said explicitly that it's claiming that Jesus is saying the people who hear and do are going to be saved. What it's missing is that Jesus is also making it very obvious that it's impossible to hear and do. That part is missing from that commentary.
hmm,
Jesus was not given that sermon to tell people, go hear this and do this, and now you're going to be saved. He's saying, good luck. When you fail, come to me.
hmm.
That's the only thing I think is missing from that commentary,
Well,
man. Other
well,
than that,
what I, and I, not to rehash it out, but I would just ask this one question: Do you think in the same way that some of these other things would be applicable before and after, that this would be in that category, or no?
I mean, like I said before, man, I think Jesus has his old covenant prophet hat on, and he's telling people, look, I'm setting this bar super high. Go and do it. Go and do it, and you're gonna be saved. Go and do it. You're gonna be righteous. Go and do it, and you're gonna have a great relationship with God. And oh, by the way, you can't do it. So now what? I am the way, the truth, and the life. Those who come to me will not perish. Right? All this kind of stuff. Like the road is, you know, narrow, and the gate is
Right.
is
Right.
it,
Well, but the reason why I ask is because, again, it's like kind of, I guess maybe that is a little bit more helpful. Like I was explaining to you earlier, it's almost hard for me to explain what I feel like is on my heart, because it
yeah.
does, it is so easy to be misconstrued as doing it from the wrong motive, for the wrong motives. But but I guess understanding that you have salvation, and still doing the things not because they're what saves you, but I don't know. I guess that's this is kind of like
You know what this
it
reminds me of? Let me add a little bit of levity here. This reminds me of a skit that I saw where these two guys are planning to rob this bank. And maybe you've seen the skit, and they come to the best possible way to rob the bank, and they say basically, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna convince them to hire us, and then we're gonna show up like we work there, and then we're just gonna keep going every day. And in 30, 40 years, they won't even know they've been robbed, and we're gonna have so much money. It's like, dude, like, then you're not really robbing a bank, right? That's what this reminds me of. When you ask me, like, does this apply before and after, like, salvation? It's like, sure.
okay.
But like, you've already, you know what I'm saying? Like, you've already got it. So go in peace.
Yeah. I got it, man. No, that was just a question. Again, like I said, we've already kind of established
And that's just
where
my
yeah,
2 cents anyway.
yeah. We already established where we said. I was just curious if maybe with that added commentary, worded a little bit differently, if it, I guess, clarified anything
Right.
that I couldn't do an adequate job of doing before. But no worries, man. Yeah. All in all, man, I think this was awesome. This was
Great
very,
discussion. Great
yeah,
conversation. Thanks for pulling
absolutely.
out that commentary and, giving us some good, nuggets to chew on. And
Yeah.
I think that's a wrap. So love you, man. And I think, that
Love you
does it
too,
for this
brother.
episode of Walk Talk. Thank you all so much for listening. If you haven't already, please follow the show. And before you go, leave your favorite verse in the comments below. God
God
bless.
bless.
This podcast is sponsored by my company, ForgePoint. Do you want to make 2026 a year of growth but don't know where to start? Join a 5-week mastermind class focused on the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth by John Maxwell. You'll unlock your full potential as you become more intentional about growth that will impact your life, your family, and your community. We have a special group for pastors and church leaders starting soon. Just go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off. Again, go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off.